Hello and welcome to Fanfic Friday. It's not Friday, but we do have a fanfic for you. As a matter of fact, it's Chapter 2 of Tandem. But before we get started, I just want to say a little something about YouTube. And that is, oh my goodness! Where are you people even coming from? It's crazy, like, seriously. But, I love all of you people out there who are watching my videos, especially that What comic dub. Apparently everyone's liking that. But without further ado, let's get started on Tandem, though. Chapter 2. Marinette almost found herself to be annoyed when the world didn't immediately stop. Bells rang, students shuffled from class to class, pencils did not pause their scratching. Birds flew by windows, and people laughed and talked and sang. So, no, maybe it wasn't the end of times. But for her, it was the end of an era where things that made as much sense as they could for a teenage girl with a superhero secret identity. If Marinette had thought her life was complicated before, oh boy, was she in for it now.
If I'm Ladybug,
she thought dimly,
and Adrian is Chat,
her heart sped up wildly, just stating the fact in her mind.
Then who's pining after who?
She finished with a confused huff. Once the girls had returned to the locker room, Marinette had booked it, deflecting all questions thrown her way by saying she had to use the restroom. Needing to be alone, she had ducked into one of the rarely used shower stalls, sliding down its tiled interior as she desperately attempted to suck air into her lungs. Marinette sat with her knees to her chin, oblivious to the grimy floor and the fact that the bell was set to ring in mere minutes. Her head spun, one half of her mind unable to process the situation she now found herself in, and the other mentally kicking herself for not putting it together sooner. Suddenly, the plastic shower curtain hanging inches from her huddled form was yanked to the side, revealing a very concerned Alya. Her solitude hadn't lasted long, it would seem. Alya stepped into the small space, closing the curtain behind her and hunkering down next to her friend.
Marinette, what's wrong, girl? You just kicked butt out there,
the redhead said, pouring as much love and encouragement as she could into the words. Marinette just groaned, burying her face in her hands.
And the way you and Adrian moved together, it was almost like you guys had practiced. Oh, if only you knew how right you were,
Marinette whispered in her mind, rubbing the back of her neck before taking a deep breath and glancing up at her friend. Alya gave her a reassuring smile, placing her hands on Marinette's folded-up knees.
You don't have to tell me right away what's bothering you,
she began in a soothing tone, having gotten used to her friend's anxiety attacks years.
But just know that I'm here to talk if you need it.
Marinette blinked up at her friend. Then, to her utter surprise, she found herself laughing. Tiny giggles that erupted into a full-bellied howl as the whole situation came crashing down around her. After a moment's hesitation, Alya joined in, chuckling as she pulled Marinette unsteadily to her feet. The giggling duo grasped to each other, almost losing their balance as a hand flew out to steady themselves against the wall, instead coming to rest on a button. Their screams turned to shrieks as the two girls struggled to dodge the shower of water raining down upon them. Marinette felt the tension in her belly loosen as she tumbled out of the stall, Alya clutching to her drenched form and wailing about her hair. Locking eyes, the pair burst out again, laughing at each other's drenched appearance. Deciding now was probably not the best time for a shower, they went off in search for a towel. Leave it to Alya to make her laugh in the midst of a crisis. For perhaps the 100th time, Marinette silently thanked whatever lucky stroke had delivered her best friend to her side. Of course, Marinette's momentary calmness dissipated as soon as she stepped foot out of the gym. Every step she took down the hall carried her closer to the classroom, and by extension closer to...
Did he expect her to act like Ladybug? Should she treat him the way she treats Chat?
Both options seemed wrong somehow. Marinette skidded to a halt when the door came into view, Alya stopping short beside her. Urging her friend to go in ahead of her, Marinette took a moment to steady herself, mind still reeling at a mile per minute. She glanced around the empty hall, gathering all the false courage she could muster, and striding purposely through the doorway. She could feel his presence the moment she rounded the corner, could sense his eyes tracking her every step. It took everything she had not to trip. Marinette avoided looking at him, cursing the blush she could already feel cropping up on her neck as she hustled to her usual spot. She slid into the seat behind him, heart hammering as she stared at the back of his head.
Right there. He'd always been just right there.
Marinette marveled once again, scanning the back of his form. Adrian's hands clutched at the edge of the table. His body kept twitching, shoulders tensed up and hair on end. Suddenly, she realized he was having a hard time trying not to turn around in his seat to look at her.
Oh,
she thought, an unreadable emotion bubbling up in her chest as she noticed the situation he was currently facing. See, while Marinette now had months of practice sitting through classes just a few feet away from her crush, Chat was now experiencing that exhilarating proximity for the first time. She almost broke out into giggles again at the thought of him squirming in his seat, unable to see his ladybug but knowing she was there. An almost sadistic sense of relief washed over her as she realized whatever turmoil she was feeling right now was echoed in the boy before her.
Guess that's just one more thing we share,
she thought, with a small smile. It was the longest class Adrian could ever recall having. Behind you, his subconscious reminded him once again. How was it possible that only 5 minutes had passed? When Marinette had entered the classroom, her blue eyes were cast forward, body rigid as she blew past him. Adrian tracked her every movement, soaking in the familiarity of his partner's movements, while silently willing her to glance at him. She didn't. Ladybug is right behind you. 10 minutes in, Nino had elbowed more than a few times already, finally snatching the pencil from his best friend's hand when Adrian failed to stop tapping it rhythmically against the desk. He could feel her. She's always been there. After 20 minutes of class, their instructor handed out worksheets. Marinette took hers with a polite thank you. Adrian almost combusted. Ladybug does worksheets, and she's right behind you. The rest of the lesson passed in a blur of hurried writing and barely contained adrenaline for the boy. As the time remaining in this period slowly ticked away, Adrian's eyes never left the clock. Nino tried engaging him in conversation, but quickly dropped it when all he got in return was distracted one-word remarks. Behind you. Minutes turned to seconds. Adrian's heart rate spiked. The teacher announced there would be no homework, seeing as though exams were now over. Ladybug. The bell rang. Adrian whipped around in his seat, surprised his neck didn't snap with the intensity of the movement. His heart rate had sped back up, now doubling in intensity as he confirmed that Marinette was still in fact seated behind him. She gave him a look he could recall seeing many times before, though never without a mask to cover it. As Chat and Ladybug, they had become accustomed to communicating without words, relying on each other to just know what need to be done, based on facial expression alone. Adrian felt a swell of exhilaration at seeing such a familiar trait displayed on his classmate's face.
Wait,
the look said, her eyes dashing to indicate the other people in the room. Marinette made a show of packing her things up slowly, an action that didn't go unnoticed by the girl sitting beside her. Apparently, Alya got the hint. With a quizzical expression, she scooped up her belongings and made to stand up. Glancing her blushing friend over before turning to narrow her eyes at Adrian, there was a silent threat there, he realized, Alya exited the room, dragging a confused Nino out by the collar out with her. The second the classroom door slid shut, Adrian's sole focus snapped back to the girl in front of him. She was slumped over, face cradled between her folded arms on the desk. Suddenly, all the questions he had been burning to ask her over the past hour became stuck in his throat. The quiet of the room enveloped the pair, magnifying the absolute insanity of the entire situation they now shared. He stared at her crown of black hair. Trying desperately to grasp at his fleeting confidence, Adrian's mind attempted to arrange a suave, chat-worthy opening line. He tried to think of something, anything to break the tension in the room. Drawing up a blank, all he could manage to squeeze out was, "Ladybug, huh?" Smooth going, he thought to himself dejectedly, face flushing as he watched her shoulders stiffen up. Before he could get a chance to backpedal, however, the breath caught in his throat at the sight of her blue eyes peeking out from behind latticed fingers. She took in his flustered appearance, swallowing a smile that as she moved to prop her chin up on her folded hands. Something about watching Adrian Agreste utterly falling to pieces before her made Marinette's heart soar.
Hey, chat.
She replied softly, Ladybug's effortless confidence overcoming Marinette's usually shy demeanor as she glanced at him meaningfully. A huge, goofy smile nearly split his face in half, only widening when he heard her let out a small snort as a reaction. Adrian was too over the moon to feel embarrassed. Marinette's chest ached, seeing the distinctively chat-like expression displayed on the features of her long-time crush. Once again, the realization that the two most important guys in her life were actually one in the same came crashing in on her. Although this time, it wasn't a frightening sensation. Instead, it caused a wave of giddy relief to sweep over her.
Oh, great.
She was giggling again. Adrian, Chat, joined in immediately, the tension in the room dissipating like a short-lived summer rain. Both students just kept glancing at each other, dissolving back into snorts of laughter any time their eyes would meet. This went on for quite a few minutes before tapering off slowly. Marinette wiped tears of hilarity from the corners of her eyes as Adrian shook his head in wonder. Before he could say anything further, his cell phone chimed. Cursing softly, Adrian glanced at the screen quickly before returning his gaze to Marinette. It's just my driver and...
Go ahead. I understand,
she said, smiling as she slung her backpack over one shoulder. He gathered his things dejectedly, seriously considering if the ramifications for blowing off this afternoon session was worth a few extra minutes with her. Of course it was, he thought, as if she could tell exactly what he was planning on doing, and, honestly, Adrian wouldn't put it past her. Marinette shook her head at him.
I'll see you later,
she reminded him, tapping at the studs sitting in the center of her earlobes. One more thing I was too blind to notice, Adrian marveled, twirling the silver ring around his knuckles. I look forward to it as always, my lady, he responded, relieved to find his confidence had returned as he held the door open for her with a flourish. In their euphoria, neither of them had noticed the two eavesdropping students crouched down on the other side of the door, wildly shushing each other as they watched their best friends exit the classroom. Marinette stepped into the hallway with a scoff, though, to his infinite pleasure, Adrian spotted a blush creeping up the back of her neck as she made her way down the corridor. Taking a few hurried steps to catch up with her, the duo turned a corner, leaving Alya and Nino the only ones in the now deserted hallway. Well, stuff went down, eh? Anyways, but yeah, that was chapter 2 of Tandem. Hope you guys have a wonderful day.